Hey everyone, I'm Liz Ferry and welcome to another episode of my Crochet Lessons series. In this episode, we'll be going over how to single crochet seamlessly in the round. This technique is simple to do, and it makes a huge difference to the texture of the fabric you're making. Here's a piece of fabric I made with a seam. You can see very clearly the way the flow of the stitches gets interrupted by the seam. And here's a piece of fabric I made without a seam. As you can see, there's a huge difference in the flow of the stitches with and without a seam. Single crocheting seamlessly is another essential doll making technique, but it can be applied to most projects worked in the round. If you want to see my full video on what you'll need to begin crocheting, check out my crochet materials list video. For the process of crocheting in the round, you'll just need yarn, a crochet hook, and stitch markers. For this project, you'll need to know how to make the chain stitch, the slip stitch, and the single crochet stitch. You can find all of these crochet lessons in the playlist at the end of this video, or in the description below. I've started my work with a chain of 16. In my basic single crocheting in the round video, I joined the foundation chain into a circle by slip stitching to the first chain of the foundation, and then I chained one to count as the first stitch of the row. To crochet seamlessly, I'm also going to slip stitch into the first chain to join the foundation chain in a ring, but instead of chaining one to count as the first stitch, I'm just going to count the slip stitch itself as the first stitch of the row. So I'm going to work a slip stitch into the first chain. Sometimes the foundation chain can become twisted when you do this. To avoid that, make sure the fronts of the stitches are all facing up towards you, with no twists in the chain, before inserting the hook into the first chain. Pull up a loop, and slip stitch. And that slip stitch will count as the first stitch of the row, so I'll mark it with a bobby pin. Then I'll single crochet into each chain of my foundation chain, working along the outside of the circle, until I get back to this first stitch of the row. Now I'm at the end of the first row of single crochets, and I've added a single crochet to each stitch. Because I didn't add a seam at the beginning of the row, I don't need to skip any stitches like I would if I had slip stitched and chained one to start the row. Normally, to end the row and start a new row, you would slip stitch to the first stitch of this row to create another seam stitch and join the first stitch of the row to the last stitch of the row, then chain one for the first stitch of the next row. But since we're working seamlessly, I'm not going to use any slip stitches to join the row. I'm just going to once again crochet directly into the first stitch to begin the next row. This time though, I'll just single crochet into the first stitch. And then mark that stitch as the new first stitch of the row with my bobby pin. Continue to add more single crochets to the remaining stitches of the row until you get back to this first stitch. Now I'm at the end of another row of single crochet stitches, so again I'll skip making a slip stitch to join the first and last stitch, and instead I'll single crochet directly into the first stitch of the row to begin the next row, and mark that stitch as the new first stitch. Then just continue to add rows and rows of stitches by repeating the process. Essentially, we're working single crochet stitches in a spiral to form each new row. Once you want to end your work, slip stitch to the first stitch of the row to join the first and last stitches together. Then cut off the yarn, and pull the cut off end through the loop of the slip stitch. Now let's go over that again to review. Start with a chain of 16, then slip stitch into the first chain to join the foundation chain in a ring. Before joining the ring, make sure the fronts of the chains are all facing up towards you with no twists in the chain. Then slip stitch in the first chain, don't chain one to count as the first stitch, just count the slip stitch as the first stitch of the row, and mark it with a bobby pin. Then single crochet into each chain of the foundation chain along the outside of the circle until you get back to the first stitch of the row. Once you reach the end of the row of single crochets, single crochet directly into the first stitch to begin the next row. And mark that stitch as the new first stitch of the row. Continue to add more single crochets into the remaining stitches of the row until you get back to the first stitch. Then just continue to add rows by repeating the process. To end the work, slip stitch to the first stitch of the row. Then cut off the yarn and pull the cut off end through the loop of the slip stitch. You can use this technique when making arms and legs of dolls, or for parts of doll clothing, like sleeves, pants, tops, and skirts. The pieces you make using this technique will look more professional with a cleaner finish. You can also use this technique when working increases and decreases in the round rather than plain single crochet. I'll show you how to do that in a future video. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, give it a like and share it on social media. And if you'd really like to help out the channel, you can donate to my Patreon. You can get some pretty cool perks through Patreon, like seeing my videos early, access to some of my prototype patterns, and discounts in my Ravelry store, depending on your level of donation. You can find out more about that at patreon.com/fairyrings. You could also subscribe and click the bell icon so that you don't miss the next episode of this series when it comes out. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!